Hello, and welcome to Anything Goes. Hope everyone's doing all right out there. With me, of course, my co-host, Jason. How are you?
It seems like there was a question mark implied in that tone. My co-host?
I had a memory block. I saw your name, but I couldn't say it.
A rose by any other name would smell as sweet.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That's exactly what I meant. Now, I won't be able to sleep tonight until you tell me what number you are in the charts on Amazon.
I honestly haven't checked in like a week.
You've got a book out, haven't you?
I do have a book out, and in fact, I am doing. I had several appearances I'm contractually obligated to make, and so I wasn't certain how many I was going to sell that first one. So I do have some that if y'all can't make it out to Texas, if you want, email me at sirupapers at sirupapers@yahoo.com and contact me. I can for $25, as long as you're continental U.S., I can mail you an autographed copy of my book.
Okay, so that's sirupapers@yahoo.com.
Correct. Now, if you want to just buy the book, Amazon is and barnesandnoble.com. They both have them. I think Target.com has them as well. If you, like I said, if you don't live in the continental United States, or if you do live in the continental United States and you want a signed copy, you can email me at Papers and I can send that out to you. We've got a way of doing it. But yeah, no, okay, so truth be told, I think we peaked at like 42,000 on the chart. And like that's all books overall, right? Mm-hmm. So I consider it a win. I mean, it's a very niche book, so I consider it a win.
Absolutely. It's a good number to be at compared to the other week. I mean, you're definitely going up there, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. Now, again, I think we're back down low, but I mean that's fine. I've got another appearance actually, I think it'll be airing on Halloween for the Caravan to Midnight. I'll be doing that. And there's another program whose name escapes me at the moment. I'll let everyone know. But there's a link. I'll share that one when it comes out.
All right. Well, there is links to you anyway in the description below.
Exactly.
I'm sure people know where to get hold of you. And tonight we're inviting anybody in the chat who wants to come on and join us for a chit chat about anything. Mm-hmm. I'll send a link, or I'll put the link in the description. Give us a shout up if anyone would like to join us. So what you had something to you were showing me something just before the show.
We don't have a particular topic today, but something fun that happened to me this week. Got my first Mr. A comic. It was published by Steve Ditko. He's been, for those of you who don't know, he co-created Spider-Man. In fact, some people, depending on who you talk to, it's a big controversy in the comic community. Some people believe that Steve Ditko should be considered the creator of Spider-Man. It's complicated. No need to get into it.
Okay.
But Steve Ditko is an amazingly influential artist, and he created a lot of these profoundly unique characters. Well, he was big into objectivism, Ayn Rand, her philosophy, and he was very secretive. He almost never did interviews. In fact, the best interview you can find is not even an interview. It's a public statement he made for a program in the late 90s. You can actually find it online on YouTube. Just type in Steve Ditko statement. It's like 5 minutes. It explains why he created Mr. A as an example of objectivism, objective philosophy, objectivist philosophy. There we are. Because he felt that the problem that he saw was that art was designed to show man as things could be, right? That was the entire point for artwork. It's like history was about how man did act. Artwork was supposed to be about who you were, or what we were supposed to be striving for. His fundamental fear was that all of these new superheroes that were being created, they were all anti-heroes, and that it was setting a bad example, that we made artwork in movies, television, comics, we were aiming towards these very flawed, broken heroes which and oftentimes a lot of the stories revolved around the fact that they weren't much better than the villains they were fighting. Right? There was that moral gray, and so the problem is once everything becomes gray, then there's no right, there's no wrong, and then you lead to chaos. Right? There had to be something to strive for, and that was his entire. And that's why he created Mr. A. It was to say that there was this idea of what is right and what is wrong, and that you needed to actively and proactively shoot for what was right. Because though you may fall or fail in reality, the shooting for it is what's necessary to keep you away from this, and to understand that corruption comes in many forms. But the second you become corrupt, you begin to degrade. So it's sort of this expression. He died just a few years ago. But like I said, he was very secretive. You could he self-published a lot of his work, and you had to, and even ordering it, right? It was sort of old school. You kind of had to. They finally got PayPal, so that made life easy. But I just got it, and it's a cool little thing that he actually physically handled before his death, and sort of participated in. And they're going to do this big reprint of all his artwork and compile it, and all these Mr. A stories, and compile them into one story. But it's actually kind of against his wishes. The few things he did write out said he didn't really want that to happen. So I feel it's like, I know I'm gonna buy that when it comes out, because I can't not do it. He's too important a figure, and I think there are some times we kind of have to look at artists and say, look, you're too big, you're too influential. This is archaeology. This is history. We do have to, pull this together. But it's sort of my way of honoring his wishes and saying, look, I'm gonna go ahead and at least pay you directly in your estate directly as an honor, because I am absolutely going to read the crap out of that book when it does eventually come out. But it's just a little fun thing, and they sent in some other stuff. It was mostly just like packing material, right? But it's they sent some weird stuff, like just some random drawings that some other artists, that they had done exchanges with, had done an interview. Like, this was just stuff to protect the book. But that Robin Snyder, he's the guy who was actually handling the transactions, like a newsletter he did. It was just fun stuff. But Robin Snyder is the guy who actually did the packaging, and he's sort of overseeing the sale of the rest of these booklets. So just fun stuff.
Yeah. I'm just noticing the chat. Gary, if you want to talk about portals and versus vortex, come on and talk about it instead of talking about it in the chat. I dare you. And Jeff, hello, darling. If you want to come on, let us know, because I do love Jeff. Jeff.
Yeah.
You will. Of course you do.
Actually, hold on. I'm thinking. Sorry, different Jeff. I'm sorry, different Jeff.
You will do. And who else we've got in Max Powers? Yeah, that's fascinating about your books, and I don't have a kind of that interest in that kind of thing, or collections. I might have done when I was a kid. I don't know why I haven't, because I'm sure I do have something, probably feathers and stones kind of things that I collect. But it's nice that you've got that. But where do you keep it all? Do you kind of moderate yourself on your comics and your books? And
this is honestly the first comic I've bought in years now. In fact, I sold most of my collection years ago. I've kind of gotten into just the collected editions to read it, but the problem is so much of the work that's coming out is just bad. Like, it really goes back to what he was talking about. Like, a lot of these characters, like, they're rehashing. Okay, no one cares about this, but I'm going to talk about it. A lot of the stories we're coming out now are just rehashes of stuff Kirby and Stanley and Steve Ditko were all telling in the 60s and 70s. Like, that's all it is. They are literally rehashing it, or it just comes off as the worst, or let me rephrase this, the most expensive fan fiction ever done, right? If that makes any sense. Now, there is some good storylines out there, don't get me wrong. And there are some people, I actually, ironically, of all, like, this is going to sound profoundly stupid because I'm just a little too old for them, but I know about them. But the Power Ranger comic that IDW is doing right now is actually really good. They've started taking their own little unique pathway. It's actually really interesting. But the problem is everyone's just rehashing the same old stories, or it's this stupid fan fiction stuff. And the problem is it goes back to sort of what Steve Ditko was talking about. It's like we've made these characters so morally corrupt now that you're like, why am I even bothering to read them? Like, it's one thing to have a character like Wolverine, right, where he's morally questionable or whatever, but then you still have to have someone alongside say, hold on, you're better than this, right? We don't get those stories anymore. Not really. Like Spider-Man occasionally will do it. So it's just they're uninteresting, they're uninspired. It's the same old stuff. They don't want to take. The problem is everyone wants to take chances and be the new guy, but it just comes off as just being repetitive and boring.
That's something that's happening, isn't it, with lots of things. I find that about films, especially because I love scary films and gory films. I don't watch any now, though, because they just seem really, I don't know, it's kind of lost this ability to, CGI and all these special effects kind of mask over what could be portrayed in a different way.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Like when you read a book and there's so much more detail in it than a film. But the old films has had more detail in it than nowadays. I don't know what it is, but I've never really found a good scary film now that scares me.
I'm not a big fan of scary movies, to be honest. Particularly slasher films. It just always seemed wrong. But so here's my thought, and I was actually thinking about this. I think the problem is those old 80s, like the old 80s slasher films, they had sort of a they were tongue in cheek, weren't they? Like they knew what they were. And so they kind of, it's like because you were in on the joke, I think they could get away with doing stuff that wasn't as realistic. The problem is everyone's trying to take it seriously now. And so that sense of irony is sort of gone. And if it's not there, it's just, why am I watching some guy torture these teenagers, right? And they lampshade everything now, right? Because now everyone's got to talk about, well, oh no, it's like, oh, this is the black character, they're going to die. This is the virgin character. Wait, no, you've had sex, therefore you have to die. Like, they lampshade the motifs of horror, and they call it out. And the problem is, once you've done that, you're basically more of a commentary on a thing than being part of the actual genre, right? And so you sort of lose the entire mystique. It's sort of I was listening to somebody, who was it? They were talking about why Deadpool was the worst thing that ever happened to comic books. And do you know who Deadpool is at all? They've made 2 movies out of him. I don't know if you know anything about him.
No.
It's fine. Anyway, he's basically a parody. He's become basically a parody of superhero comics, is what he is. He's sarcastic. He doesn't care about anything. He regenerates. So, but he breaks the fourth wall in the comics and in the movie, right? And so the problem is it's not that there isn't room for like Gulliver's Travels and Tilting at Windmills. I just forgot the name. I keep seeing Ponce de Leon, but that's not him. The play, or the story about the guy who goes tilting at windmills. He's a knight. His name escapes me. Anyway, the thing is, these are commentaries. These are satires, and they're send-ups, and they're like, there is a niche for that, and that should exist within any form of artwork, right? The problem is stuff like Deadpool and even the Harlequin stuff that's coming out now for DC. They're all satires of the genre at large, right? Well, the problem is, if they're successful, and what's happened is, because of their success, they've sort of, like, now everyone's kind of doing it to a point, and everything's a satire. The problem is, again, it's weird. It comes back here as well. When satire has an appropriate point, but when you've destroyed the morals upon which the satire is based, then what you're left with is ultimately hollow. Right. And again, it goes back to what I think Ditko was talking about, artwork is supposed to tell us who we can be. Well, if you destroy the ideals, if you destroy what we could become, then all we're left with is what we are. And if there's no hope to strive for something greater, then we by nature devolve into something far worse, which is hopeless. And that's the entire point. Comics are a unique medium. They're not literature, but they're not purely visual either, right? It's something unique within the human psyche and relies off a lot of things that go back a long way as far as visual storytelling, communication. And but the thing is, they were sort of given to kids between 8 and 13. That was sort of the original target audience for a lot of it. Should it remain that way? Not necessarily. I think there's always room for it. But the thing that made a lot of the Marvel characters so popular is because they were all ages. It wasn't, it was fit for those young age, but anyone could read them and they would be perfectly acceptable. The thing is, they were teaching these younger groups that there was something to strive for. There was good in the world, and they could be the ones to bring it. That there were people that you could choose to be the kind of person who made the world a better place. If that message is gone, and it is, then you're kind of left with what we have now, which is this just destroyed society. And like you said, once you start satirizing things, once you remove the thing that makes them sort of acceptable, it does play with your head, right? Like the horror movie, like you were talking about. The stuff from the 80s, you kind of knew what was going on. You were in on the gag. It was fun. But once you make it serious and once you start lampshading all of the tropes, you're demeaning the things that kept it fun, and now it's just look at us torture these people, and that has a psychological impact. It has to.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the imagination's gone.
Yeah,
something's killed it. Some way, I don't know. Masked it in some way. I mean, I like, I get what you mean about the comics. But I remember growing up, my dad, he used to read these westerns. They're in a comic form.
Yeah.
Comics for adults, I guess.
Yeah.
They were all over in France as well. You could get them. I think there's something about them that gives more to the imagination, that lets you.
It's called the gutter. Actually, in a comic page, there's the space in between the panels, right? It's called the gutter. Your brain fills in what happens from panel 1 to panel 2. And the thing is, there's really nothing to tell you what's happening between the panels. Your brain fills that in. And like with any book, you're filling in the sound of the voice. You're filling in the details you can't see. And there's things you can hide. So it's still a form of literature. It's just a visual literature. So like I said, it fills it in. And there's a lot of great comics that come out of Europe. I mean, they just always have been. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's a unique medium unto its own, but it feels like it's dying because the people who are working in it now, it feels like they can't get out of their own agendas, right? Like originally people who were getting into it, they just want to tell good stories. Now it's like they got to have a political agenda. They got to tell you, they got to moralize to you. And even then it's like, that's kind of okay to a point. If yours was a message of hope, if yours wasn't a message of, what we have now, which is just, there's no good, there's no bad, there's only this gray mentality. There's just these broken people. You're never going to get better. It's like, that's depressing. That doesn't give people hope. And any society without hope turns on itself and degrades. And the idea, and here's the thing, I think embedded in the idea of doing better is the idea that it was flawed to begin with, right? Like you understand there was something broken and you're trying to make it better. The problem we have now is everyone's like, everything's broken and it can't be fixed. And they're like, well, you lied to us by saying everything was wonderful. No one ever said it was wonderful. We just said you could fix it. And there was that hope. But now it's like we don't even have the hope of fixing it. It's just we needed to destroy everything because what are we going to do? Right? You know, it's just there's no hope. And so there's no tolerance for anyone else. There's just lashing out in anger and pain. And that's not the world that's something that moves the world forward.
No. They've lost the simplicity of it, maybe as
Mm-hmm.
well, of just, you know, doing small things is maybe what makes the world go round rather than looking at these big problems. Just looking at a couple of comments here, I want to go back because Ellie said I can't find it. She likes suspense films and books. I like them too. I like I like to not know what's coming next, but you always know what's coming next. So
Yeah,
kind of just spoils it. And Ellie, she's asking you about your sighting.
Oh yeah.
You up for giving us another rendition of what happened?
I would be happy to. Although, real quickly before we leave the previous comment, Agatha Christie. My mom loved mysteries, and so I was raised on Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes, and I liked the ones because they were smarter. It wasn't about the blood and the gore, and it was about literally trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
How like that's something I think we've lost. We don't see anymore, which is why the movie recently came out. Rian Johnson directed. It's called Knives Out.
Right.
Has an all-star cast. That movie is brilliant because it starts off Agatha Christie, sort of turns into a Hitchcock film for half the movie, and then it ends again as an Agatha Christie story. It's really very well done, but it's in that vein of actual suspense and working through it. That's something we got lazy somewhere along the way. We didn't want to do the work. That's for my encounter. Yeah. 1992. I'm 11 going on 12. We were fishing. It's summer, June. We were fishing in a creek near my house, about a half a mile from my house, called 10 Mile Creek. Look, as an aside, Texans are good at a lot of things. Naming things, not so much. Like, why is Round Rock, Texas called Round Rock? Well, because there was a big round rock there. Well, and here's the importance of the rock was if you could see it, you knew you could cross the river safely, right? But why is it called 10 Mile Creek? Because it's 10 miles long, right? And so it's like we have there's Lake Texoma. Why is it called Lake Texoma? Because it's a lake between Texas and Oklahoma. We are terrible at naming things. It is just take the name for what it is. It's why we probably steal all the European names, right? Like we've got an Italy and a it's not Italy, it's Italy and Paris and Italy. So it's we're fishing in the creek. It's a small creek. Something to remember, and this does have some minor importance. Texas, particularly North Texas, where I live and grew up, is basically sitting on a big limestone slab. So a lot of these creeks, like 10 Mile, are actually cut deeply into that bedrock. And so when you're at the bottom of it, there's a good 10 to 15, sometimes 20 feet between you and the top of where everyone else is, right? Because it's really carved its way in because of all the floods that we get every spring. And there's trees on either side. So basically, once you get behind the tree line, you're invisible, right? No one can see you. You're basically off on your own. You might as well be 100 miles away. We just finished fishing. I was packing up. My friend had already gone up the hill. So it's almost impossible to get into these things, except for a few places where the wall has collapsed and sort of makes a bank. And he's already up the embankment. He's in the trees. He's already headed home. And I'm just starting up. I get just inside the tree line when I hear a noise I've never heard before. The only way I can describe it is like an ugly crow, like that caw, but it was louder. I mean, it was very, very loud. And I thought, man, that's a weird sound. I just poked my head out from the direction it was coming, which was east of where I was. And I see what at first I think is the world's largest blue heron. Now, blue herons are big, but this was bigger. about 8 to 10 feet as far as the wingspan goes. So much, much larger. It was the same color as a blue heron, so that weird Payne's gray that they can be, sort of a dark, which sort of a bluish gray. And it was doing the S curve thing with the neck, and I saw what I thought the legs were. I'm like, this is just a blue heron. And then it's flying. Actually, because of where I am, right on the thing, I'm up and elevated, so it's flying by. It's maybe five. It's right wingtip. It's flying west. Is maybe 5 feet from my face when it comes right in front of me. That's when I realize there's no feathers on this thing. And as it keeps going, I realized what I thought had been the legs sticking out behind it was actually a tail with a weird diamond-shaped flange on the end. And I was able to get a good look of it as it flew back, as it kept, going west and then banks and turns around. So I could see this thing for 10, 15 seconds, maybe, all told. And broad daylight, no feathers. And that's when I realized I saw a pterodactyl. Well, my friend comes back down and is like, hey, you coming or what? I'm like, did you just see the pterodactyl that flew by? He laughed. I'm sorry, what?
Did you see scales or anything like that? What?
I couldn't get the fine detail, but what I could see is, again, it was more skin-like. It was clearly reptilian. There were no feathers. It was a membranous wing, not a feathered wing. And again, I could see general overall shapes and things like that, but I couldn't see like the individual scales or anything like that. But I could see the wings were membranous, and I could see the color. I could see what the legs were. I could see what the tail was, that kind of thing. And of course, he laughs it off and leaves. And of course, I spent the next 20 years trying to explain what it was that I saw. Even though I believed that they existed, even at that time, I couldn't perceive the idea they existed in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, right? That's all stuff for some distant land, exotic and strange, like the Congo or Scotland. That's a little nod to you, Danielle. But yeah, it's not. Yeah, certainly not. Not Dallas, Texas, right? Not one of the largest conurbations in the United States, but a lot of people have seen them here. And truth be told, I think the thing that stuck out to me was if I was going to, I even thought maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing, right? I'm like, well, you know what? You love dinosaurs. Maybe you hallucinated it. But my problem is I would have hallucinated a pteranodon, right? That's the thing that most people you'd think of, because what's the pteranodon is the one that everyone gets. That's the toy you get, right? It had a beak. It has a crest. It has no tail. It's big. That's what was on the Flintstones. It's what's on all the stuff. Like that's what you would have seen. But instead, I see a Rampharactoid, which, even though I guess we're in the books, I didn't care because they were small and they looked like lizards. Like they didn't seem strange enough to me. The thing is, we see them all the time, and the more I've looked, we see them in artwork all throughout history. I would even argue this may be what Isaiah is talking about when he talks about the fiery flying serpents. They may be the same thing Herodotus is talking about. I would argue that this is the same thing as a wyvern, which is a type of dragon known in heraldic art. And there's reasons for that. I would even argue that this species is what the people saw in the late 1800s when the event we talked about, the Jersey Devil. Well, I think that's what they saw was an adult, Rampharactoid pterodactyl. They seem to be all over the place.
Wow.
And they are seen quite often. The problem is, in fact, we can even go back. We see stories about people seeing pterodactyls in the 1800s, but at some point, people said, "Nope, those things are extinct. You're crazy if you see them," and they stopped reporting on them. But people have seen them forever, and it's just that you couldn't talk about it. As soon as I came out as a biblical paranormal researcher, as soon as I started telling people my story just a few years ago, 2 people that I knew personally came out and said, "Hey, let me tell you about my encounters with those same creatures." And then I had other people like, "Hey, let me tell you about the Sasquatch I saw on the side of I-20. Let me tell you about what I saw in my backyard just the other week." And I'm still getting reports out of the same area from this, from people who I know, and other people who. My favorite story about this comes from a woman I met completely randomly in Italy, Texas. I was down there looking for something else. And I spent some time just asking random people weird questions. I said, "Hey, have y'all ever seen anything weird around here? And they're like, well, how weird? How? I'm like, I don't know, something shouldn't be existent. And I'll throw out like a Sasquatch or a dinosaur or something like that, a pterosaur. They're like, well, okay, this is weird, but let me tell you this story. And the thing is, you can't lead anybody, right? You can't give them the details. You wait for them. And the thing that's weird is every single person I've ever spoken to about these living pterosaurs, without prompting, they'll all say, at first I thought I was looking at a heron, or at first I thought I was looking at a crane, or first I thought I was looking at a pelican, but then I got a closer look. And that's actually one of the keys I use to knowing who's trying to shine me on and who isn't. I've thrown out dozens of accounts because I'm like, I don't trust this account at all. Not because it falls outside of what I would necessarily think. It's just sometimes you just listen, you're like, something feels off about this. Right? Sometimes you're like, look, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's just it doesn't feel right, and I won't trust it. The stuff I trust are the ones where it's like, okay, there's little details that I can verify, and that's one of them. And so she was driving from Italy to drop off her daughter at DFW airport. So she's going up 35. And she talks about how her daughter was the first one to see it. And she describes it as having as being about 8 to 10 foot wingspan, and having a tail with a flange on the end. You know, she said it looks like a little diamond or heart shape at the end. And they watched it because it was flying right about eye level. And then she said, and then it sort of banked and flew under the bridge. And I'm like, oh, under the bridge where? She said, oh, and it was in Lancaster Soto area, right about where Beltline Road is. I'm like, that's the 10 Mile Creek. That's the same creek. I saw it, and even though the book had already come out, another friend of mine, I wish I could have put his story in my book. He saw one just a few months ago from literally a mile east of where I had been. So they're still seen in the same region today. I'm trying to figure out a good way to create some sort of a camera trap to catch them. But it's one of those things where there are these little details you hear, and you're like, okay, so everyone's telling me the same story, right? They have an S-curve shape in their neck when they fly, tail at the end. At first they thought it was a known animal, but then they realized, no, this is not what I'm looking at. And it allowed me to sort of realize maybe these things are seen way more often, and except people aren't allowed to talk. They just don't feel like they can talk about it without being destroyed publicly. Secondly, I think a lot of people are seeing them, but they don't recognize them for what they are. Right? They're too busy with their phones. They're not taking that closer look. And so it's just another blue heron. So who cares?
Well, look, someone has decided to join us, and it's Pat from Primate Objective. I've remembered the full name.
Yeah.
Excellent.
How are you doing?
Hey, guys. Hey, Danielle and Jason. What's up? I'm just kind of following along and decided to jump in because what you're talking about, Jason, I've never heard you tell this story before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured this is probably the best time to jump in and discuss what you're talking about and what you saw.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had a similar thing happen to me. I think I've told 2 people my whole life, and I never talk about it on air because it's not Bigfoot related. But it really struck me what you were saying and how you described it, broad daylight and all that. And so I just wanted to jump in and kind of maybe discuss it for a minute and tell you what I saw.
Sure. Absolutely.
Because I'd be, my true skeptical brain and even though I'm an open-minded guy,
Mm-hmm.
I would say to people, it's like a lot of people that have never seen a blue heron, would think it's a pterodactyl. That's kind of what it looks like, but because they are big, people don't realize how big those are, man.
Yeah, no, blue heron's massive.
Yeah, I guess a typical it would be about 7 foot wingspan, maybe something like that.
Most of them tend to be closer to 6, but yeah, I mean they're not small.
Yeah, so yeah, I saw something once, and again, I think I've only told 2 people my whole life, and I've never talked about it on air, and I don't think I ever wanted to talk about it on air, but you've kind of inspired me to. I was in Augusta, Georgia at the time, which oddly enough is near. I was maybe 3/4 of a mile from I-20. You keep saying I-20, I-20. I'm like,
yep.
Because I-20 goes from Georgia to Texas. And it was nighttime. I was staying in the house that I grew up in as a child. I was a young adult at the time. I was probably in my early 30s. I'm 48 now. And I was staying there by myself because I had a job. I was based out of Atlanta, and I was in Augusta because I was working a job site there. And so I was there at the house I grew up in by myself. My parents were selling the house, and it was just it was a convenient place for me to stay. And I'm sitting on the back porch at night, listening to music, smoking. It's probably a Friday night or something, just I was smoking a cigarette and just enjoying myself, and where I'm facing on the back porch is there's a small tree line and a creek at the very end of the backyard, and a small tree line. And something, the floodlight was on over here at the back of the house, pointed out away from me. So I was in the dark. Something caught my eye, and it was in the air. And its movement caught my eye, and I turned and looked, and it made this extremely radical maneuver, and just like it very radical in the air, and moved. It was coming like this, and then swooped down, and I got a decent look at it, even though it was dark outside. And man, It didn't have any feathers. I mean, it just didn't look like it had feathers. It looked like a gargoyle to me. So skin, like
a membranous wing. Yeah.
I just when I saw it, and I mean, it was probably a good 25 feet in front of me, and it was actually a little bit lower than me. I was on a slightly elevated back deck, And I mean, at first when it caught my eye, I thought maybe it was an owl, I mean, it's movement, and I see it, and I'm like, oh man, there's an owl, maybe going after a prey or something. I don't know. And, but when it went in front of me, I mean, that's just what I saw. I mean, I don't know how I imagined it. I don't know, dude. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. And even looking back at it now as an adult, it passed by. And I mean, I immediately, I stood up. I took my headphones off or whatever, man. I just froze. I ran inside and locked the door. No idea why. I mean, it scared me.
Yeah, no, it didn't scare me because for whatever reason, I just wasn't in a position to be scared per se. And I think, you're young, you're invincible, and it didn't seem to be threatening in any way. But here's the thing. Your story rings true for two very specific reasons. One, nighttime. These things are clearly nocturnal. Now, most people, when they see them during the day, but they see them at between 9 a.m. and the latest I've ever heard is 11 a.m. But that seems to be the latest anyone sees them in the day. Most of the time they're seen at night. I've talked to a dozen people it's at night. That's when they're out. That's when we hear them. That's when we see them. Second thing, Augusta, Georgia. Dude, Georgia is as active as the North Texas, Southern Oklahoma region for these things. Just straight up. I get most of the accounts I have are from North Texas and Oklahoma because that's where I'm at, right? Second largest is Georgia. Third, California. And here's the thing. It's like Southern Texas. We got a whole, as near as I can tell, there's an entirely different kind of pterosaur hanging out down there. But yeah, I mean, you're the right region, right time. This is exactly what That's exactly what I'm hearing. I mean, that your story is like 100 different stories that I've seen cataloged. They are right where it's supposed to be. Now, like you said, you couldn't, it's nighttime, but you could definitely see it. That's just, I mean, that's a pretty standard story. I mean, that's just what it is. Like I said, Charlemagne the God. For those of you who don't know who it is, he's big on the urban stations. He has a talk show. He's fairly large. He talked just recently talked about seeing them all the time when he was growing up in Georgia. So I mean, you're in the right spot, really, to have a sighting like that.
I guess. I mean, I couldn't wrap my head around it, and I just remember thinking that night, I'm like, what is this thing doing flying around? I mean, it was a neighborhood. So, I mean, I was sort of on the outskirts of that neighborhood. Like I said, there was a small wood line and then a creek. And I'm like, what is something like, if I saw what I saw, what in the world is it doing flying around a neighborhood where everybody could see it? And I just had this weirdest feeling that it knew it had been spotted because of that radical maneuver it made. And that happened right as I turned my head to look at what was catching my eye. And I don't know, man. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life.
So here's the weird thing. Like a lot of cryptids, my basic, with the exception of the paranormal ones, my basic default is they're just remnants of something much older, right? They're survivors of another time, and so the thing is, we're told our entire lives they no longer exist. They're extinct. They're whatever, right? They can't exist. And so when you see something that you've been told your entire life can't exist, and then you see it, it is absolutely a mind-shattering sort of event. And I think that's what most people don't fully understand is a lot of people I've talked to, like they don't want their names associated with it. They don't want me to tell people about their encounters because they're like, they don't want to sound crazy. The problem is so many people have seen these things. So many people have had these encounters. It's like, if everyone came out and said, look, we're seeing it, then you would have to say, okay, these things do exist. Let's just research them. In my broader thought is, there is active opposition to these creatures still being around, right? I think academia, the mainstream media, even the government, they don't like the fact that these things are still running around, which is why they suppress it. Because it's a narrative changer. It changes, I think, everyone likes the way society thinks of itself is in the mainstream. Once you start throwing big enough wrenches into that narrative, it disrupts things. And these creatures absolutely disrupt the mainstream narrative, which is why we're told it's almost like programming. They can't exist, right? And then when you realize that programming is wrong, it's a shock to the system. Absolutely.
It shocked my system. I mean, I can't imagine I misidentified an owl, man, and got scared. I mean, I went in the door. I locked the door. I didn't go back out on the porch. Like, I mean, I'm staying inside. Misidentifying an owl isn't going to have that reaction. And I still to this day, I'm like, did I see what I was seeing? It looked like a gargoyle to me.
Yeah.
Skin, or like gray skin.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, that's exactly what I saw. It's the same color. Here's the thing. Again, let's talk about the Jersey Devil, which is significantly further north than where you were in Georgia at the time, but it's not really that far if you think about it flying. The main encounter that everyone talks about in the 1800s, that's what they described. They describe a very large creature that it was reddish brown. That's the most common color outside of gray that I've ever encountered. They talked about having a long tail with a long bifurcated tail. That's a rhamphorhactoid pterodactyl. That's what people are seeing in Georgia. That's what people are seeing in Texas. That's what people are seeing in California. That's what people were drawing in heraldic art in the 16th century, right? In 16th century Europe. It is simply, they've been around. They're just very, very rare. But every once in a while, we get to see them. My sighting was in a suburb of Dallas, Texas, right? But the thing we have to remember is our cities and towns are basically just small concrete islands, and we stay to it, right? You don't have to go that far. If you really look down on satellite, you'd realize how green everything is, right? Even particularly North Texas, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's tons of places to hide, and I've talked about it. I talked about it in my book. I talked about the green wall, which is the way we even navigate our cities, right? What we do is we create breaks near roads. The roads are shaped so all the water from rain runs off into these areas. And then we mow, right? We cut all the trees here, and then we mow right up to this new tree line. Well, what that does is it allows smaller brush to grow up, and these smaller trees and things to grow up just inside that tree line. So you can't see into it.
Mm-hmm.
You can march whole armies through a lot of these green spaces in North Texas specifically, it's the ones I'm familiar with, but even out in Georgia, I've been there. Once you get inside that green wall, you could have anything back there. No one would ever see it. And everyone's driving their cars. They're busy on their phone. They're not looking, right? We tend to stick to the paved road. And I know people are like, well, you can't hide something like that in something like a small suburb. Well, let me ask you this. Irving, Texas is literally like, here's downtown Dallas. Here's Irving. Most of Irving is just the continued concrete sprawl of Dallas, Texas, right? They have, at last count, over 1,000 feral hogs that are just causing hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage to people's lawns and homes and personal property. Most people, if you were to go and ask anyone living in Irving, have you ever seen one of these feral hogs? They tell you no. Most people have never seen these things. And these aren't piglets. These are massive creatures. They don't hide very well. And yet, most people never see them because they're nocturnal and they stick to the green areas where, again, we're not looking. So if you can hide over 1,000 feral hogs in an area like Irving, which is basically just a big city, all concrete, it's just concrete sprawl everywhere, then yeah, you can hide something like, say, a small half dozen creatures that have a wingspan of 10 feet, maybe 12 feet at most, that are nocturnal, that look like blue herons if you're not paying attention close enough, or an owl. Actually, you said an owl. One of my accounts from someone I know personally, she thought it was an owl too at first because the thing flew right past her car. And at first I was, it must be an owl. And then it does this and makes in front of her car. And it gets right in front of, the lights and everything. And she's like, holy cow, that's a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
That's just, the problem is that is absolutely everything you said rings very true. It's the right time. It's the right place. And I'll be honest, think about it. You don't expect these things to be someplace like a suburb, right? You wouldn't expect them to be there, so you're not looking for them, right?
Well, I never would have looked for them anyway, to be honest.
Exactly, but nobody's looking for them.
How many sightings are there, though? Have you looked into that exactly?
That's sort of the problem. We don't really know. Most people don't ever come out. So, I mean, if the fact that I could just say, "Hey, I'm here," and I have 3 different people show up, and 2 of whom I knew personally. I asked somebody, they volunteered it at some random store. I think a lot of people have these encounters. The problem is they're not willing to come out, so we have no idea.
I swore I was never going to talk about this on air. I promised myself, because I talk about Bigfoot a lot, and I have a very down to earth, very objective, focus. Like, I'm this kind of like very objective, focused person in the Bigfoot world, trying to keep things real. Don't wander off into weird stuff that no one really would know about anyway, right? So I just swore I would never talk about it because I never wanted to kind of confuse people. But just listening to you talk about it, I'm like, man, you know what? I told Danielle I would jump in tonight anyway, and this is I mean, like, the universe is speaking to me, so I'm just gonna.
Well, if you saw it, you need to own it, don't you? And that's it. You can't. You're being, not true to yourself by not saying that, because we can be critical and logical and that, but weird things can happen. That's the thing, isn't it? There's a lot of weirdness out there, as much as you don't want to think there is.
Yeah, and I love reality. I don't want to think that there's a ton of weirdness, and I also don't want to think it's because I've been programmed, even though that's a thing. Human beings program each other, societies program people to some degree, but hey,
well, it's another coincidence, because on Larry Batson on a Friday, it's Prehistoric Friday, when I do his my art therapy with him, and we drew one. I'm pretty sure that's what we drew.
Yeah,
Pterodactyl.
Well, I just thought it was an owl because it was late at night and I saw something in the air, and that's pretty much all that could be, know. But I didn't see a freaking owl. Like when it passed in front of me, that is not what I saw. It was bigger.
See, and this is something. This is a great opportunity to sort of mention something that a lot of people don't really get, which is things like hallucinations. Like people just like, oh, you were just hallucinating something, right? And whether it's Sasquatch or whatever, the thing that I find really interesting about the pterosaur sightings is virtually everyone says, I thought it was an owl, I thought it was a pelican, blue heron, a crane, something. They always think it's something else, then they get a look at it. That is just the perfect story. The thing is, with hallucinations, you know what it is before you see it, or even at the second that you see it, because your mind has created it. Right? That's one of the things I talk to psychologists about all the time. Like, how do we know what's hallucination and what's not? And one of the things they tell you is no one looks at a hallucination and says, I don't know what that was. Right? Because the mind is what's creating it, so you know what that is, whatever you're hallucinating about. And again, it goes back to most of the people I'm talking to, at least to my knowledge, of the people that I find to be credible, none of them have histories of psychological issues. None of them are drunk or high. They're usually at work or something. Like there's a guy Kent Hovind caught, and talked to. His story was in Fort Worth. He was working that day, right? So it's like none of these stories involve drugs or alcohol or anything. They were people living their lives. And so the fact that they start off with, I don't know what it was, or I thought it was a known thing at first, then I got a better look, that's an indication that this is something real, because it's the oddity that stood out, right? It's like, I was expecting to see this and I didn't see this, and that's what freaked me out.
Yeah.
But
I definitely wasn't hallucinating.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't on acid or any drug at all, So, and I was, again, like, people don't just hallucinate. Most normal people, I guess, if you've got schizophrenia or something, you might. But
right, and that's another thing that a lot of people overestimate is how it's like, oh, maybe it was just this, or it was like, I'm sorry, guys, I've known too many druggies in my time. That's not what that is. Like
none of them have ever seen one, have they? Drugs.
Exactly. It's like the stories I hear from my drug addled friends are none of them are like, well, I was walking home and all of a sudden this big giant Sasquatch walked out in the woods in front of me and walked off. It's like, that's not the story they tell, right? It's always, well, I was sitting around getting high with my friends and then this elephant came in. I started having a discussion with the elephant about macroeconomics. And then he pantsed me, and then I was in Cuba. And then I woke up in my laundry basket. It was a weird night. Like, that's the story you hear from a drug addict. That's not the story that people who see Sasquatch or whatever tell. And if they do mention, Cuba, and they wind up with their laundry basket, I just assume the Sasquatch was probably a hallucination as well. But so someone mentioned something in the comments. I want to sort of touch on it because I think this is something we don't really think about often enough. Unidentified flying animals. I think a lot of these sightings actually get misidentified as UFOs because there do seem to be larger birds, larger pterosaurs than something that's 8 to 10 feet in wingspan. That's something they can hide.
Yeah.
The larger things, it's like, well, where do they hide? Well, I think a lot of them are actually UFOs, and there's a lot of conversation that the ropin out in Papua New Guinea can bioluminesce, right? Well, if it's possible that some of them are bioluminescing, then what if a lot of these ghost lights, what if a lot of these, like the Marfa lights or whatever, are these pterodactyls or these pterosaurs? What if they are able to bioluminesce? Maybe it's a mating call. Maybe it's a way of attracting prey, right? Because they're mostly nocturnal. They light up. The insects go for it. Maybe they go for the insects. Maybe they're going for the bats that are going for the insects, right? We don't know.
Oh.
But it's one of those things where there are some legitimate reasons to maybe look and say, well, what if these are actually UFOs? Or let me phrase this: what if a lot of these are being cataloged as UFOs, not necessarily as a cryptid, cryptozoological encounter? So that we kind of, what we need to do is start doing some interdisciplinary communication here. And it's like, hey, let's really look at some of these UFO sightings and say, maybe there's something else, right? Maybe they're not what you think they are. So we can really come to a better understanding of this whole phenomena.
Yeah. That's interesting. I know you did a show with Tex about that, didn't you?
Yeah, we talked about that actually on Wednesday. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was Superman, but it could have been. It could have been. You don't know, do you?
No, you don't.
The one I drew, I mean, my life-like drawings that I do. It was green. I did mine green.
Well, that's a shame.
There, look. I don't know if it was what you saw, but this is a prehistoric one. Obviously,
there you go.
Very simplified.
Yeah.
But that was a coincidence that he did that. Max is saying bioluminescence requires hitting the biological logic.
What was that first word again, Daniela?
Any more comments?
And again, what I will say is, I don't know that they can bioluminesce, right? That's not really a question. I have no way of knowing until we catch one. We won't know if they light up, right? But and again, bioluminescence is more commonly found in things like squids, worms, insects, things like that.
Yeah.
Rather than higher
ocean animals.
Yeah, and definitely not in higher forms of life like reptiles. That doesn't mean it can't happen, though, right? And again, here's the problem. Life used to be far more diverse than it is now. Just because it's uncommon to the animals we see now doesn't mean it wasn't something that was available to something that lived a much longer time ago, right? I'm not saying that they do. However, the simple fact of the matter is people are talking about it. Now, here's the other thing. What if these ghost lights and these other lights that are being seen on Papua New Guinea, they're seen in Georgia, they're seen here in Texas. What if the connection to the lights and the pterosaurs isn't that the pterosaurs are lighting up, rather there's the lights are another phenomena, but for whatever reason, the pterosaurs seem to be in the same place, right? Like maybe they're whatever causes that light is attractive to the pterosaurs, right? I mean, there's 100 different ways to parse this question, but it does, the theory is that they are bioluminescent, and it's a theory. We can't prove it yet, but there does seem to be a connection. What the connection is, we don't know, but it's interesting. It's definitely interesting to think of.
Yeah, we're no wiser, are we?
No, we're not.
Mary-Ann, Pat, did you ever see the movie Gargoyles? Did your sighting look like one of those?
I probably haven't seen that movie, but I mean, I definitely know what a gargoyle looks like. And for whatever reason, I decided right then and there to attach that word to what I saw. I didn't see it. I didn't see like a head with, fangs and, like that kind of thing. I saw the wings, and
right.
they were perfect. Either flying dinosaur type wings, or would be very similar to a gargoyle, right? With the, like you said, membranous and flat, smooth, just like skin, gray skin flying through the air. Very, very weird. just very strange.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is strange, but it's you're let me assure you, you're not alone. Again, I think the Nick Redfern, not Rick, I'm sorry. Lyle's going to kick my butt when he hears that. No, Lyle Blackburn and Ken Gerhardt did a pilot. They recently released it on YouTube. I was in it, and it's actually that event that sort of got me doing what I do publicly. But I remember when he showed me some early footage while they were still in the process of filming it, right? And they said, "Hey," and he was showing me some of the other people they talked to in Southern Oklahoma, and I saw what he did, and the guy did the same thing, and I'm like, "We saw the same thing, right?" And just the understanding, the relief of saying, "I know I'm not crazy now because somebody else saw the exact same thing." And it's the fine details, right? That people are like, "Well, I saw this, and here's something that is unique to, the thing that I saw." Like if they had their necks sticking out all the way and they didn't see that, it's like then I would have been like, okay, then maybe I am crazy, right? Because I saw something very specific. And when they see those fine details, it's when it lets you know, okay, there are other people out there. Max, I saw your question about bat. Here's the thing: there are no large or fruit bats large enough native to Texas to be these things. Secondly, fruit bats don't have long enough tails. Again, what I saw had a long flanged tail. In fact, a lot of, again, some people don't describe the tail because they don't necessarily look at it, right? That's not the thing that stands out.
Have you ever drawn yours, Jason?
Yeah, lots of times.
All right. Can we see one? Can we see it?
I honestly don't have it on me at the time. Okay. Unfortunately, I've been trying to organize my office. I need to get a lot of this stuff out of my way because otherwise I just can't find anything.
Yeah. Okay.
Now there is a how about this? For next time, I promise I'll have a drawing for you.
Okay, promise.
I mean, I saw when I was a kid, man. I mean, I saw bats all the time at dusk. Going into like late dusk. I mean, they're like that big. You could see them flying around. Eating all the bugs up there. I mean, we would mess with them. We'd throw stuff up in the air, and they would dive toward. I saw 1,000 bats when I was a kid. There's no bat with a 5-foot wingspan in Georgia.
Yeah, not native. And people have thrown out the hammer-headed bat, like maybe one gets loose and people see it all the time. Again, hammerhead bats are big. They're not this big. Secondly, you could maybe throw away the sightings at night. But again, all the people I point to are usually people who have daytime sightings within 20, 30 feet, right? That's not that you're not going to mistake a hammerhead bat for that. Also, again, hammerhead bats are black and brown. They're not Payne's gray. They're not sort of a rusty red. They don't have an S-shaped curved neck, right? Because they have sort of a more mammalian neck. These all, most people who get the good daylight sightings, they have an F-shaped curve when they fly, right? Just like a crane will. And yeah, there are absolutely fruit bats who can have a 5 or 6 foot wingspan, like Paul Holland is mentioning, right? But that's half the size of what I saw. If what I'm seeing is 8 to 10 feet on the low end, then that's not a 5 or 6 foot wingspan. And the reason I can say for a fact it was 8 to 10 feet on the low end is because the creek I was in, the walls are sheer, and it's 15 to 20 feet, pretty uniform down. So I had something to actually gauge it against, right? It wasn't flying without something else for me to gauge against. It was in a known area that had an absolute distance that I could measure. So that's the thing, right? It's like these are, at a certain point we have to stop. We do need to look for other answers and other alternatives. I've postulated, what if we are seeing that? What if I am seeing a crane, but there's something altering my perception of it deliberately? So now we have to at least ask those questions, right? To say, hey, is this a possibility? And then see if we can debunk that theory, right? That's what science requires. It requires us to take all possibilities and then run them through and see what we can, what works, what doesn't work. But that being said, there is a point where we have to say, look, everyone is seeing the same thing. They have the same fine details. That's an indication that there is something being seen, and we need to at least actually start having that conversation. And the problem is we're by and large were not. So
right.
that's why we're here.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Jason, that what I saw, it never flapped its wings once.
Neither did mine.
Never flapped, and it didn't even feather like a heron will do. It didn't even feather. It just made the only movement, like the only thing different than just smooth glide was just when it made that radical movement. And as it did that, it went just outside the scope of light, where the floodlight caught my eye.
Yeah.
And it made that radical movement just as it was getting out of that scope of light. And then, I mean, dude, this thing was just hovered smooth as could be 4 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
And bats don't fly around 4 feet off the ground. I know that for a fact.
Well, and so here's the other thing, right? Again, all of the accounts I have, they're no more than 20 feet off the deck. Like the one I saw was maybe 10, 15 feet off the deck. And they do seem to just glide, right?
Yeah.
And that's, again, what's funny though is the most recent account I had from this year, he talked about how it had its wings sort of back, like it was diving. So what they made, it was doing a weird sort of dive and then moving on, right?
Yeah.
So again, your story, it just rings true because I've heard people talk like that. And they've told me this story before. Like yours is actually a very common story. I'm sorry, you're not special.
Yeah, it was higher. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it was higher in the air when it did that radical movement. It was higher in the air, and then it swooped down. That's where I saw it, and really got the best look I got at it, and tell, oh God, what is that? And it was it was all just a glide, except for whatever that radical movement was. I couldn't tell because it was such a radical movement. Even I turned and looked, but all that happened in a second or two, and then I tracked it with my eyes, and I got the best look at it. And all I could say is it had like gray skin, like large wings. Very, very bizarre. Yeah.
Well, if anyone has seen one of these things, get in touch with us and we can delve into this a bit further. Maybe the more details we can get, the more information, who knows, we might be able to work something out. I don't know. It's a good conversation anyway. We have come over the hour. I just wanted to share quickly before we go that I saw something surreal today, which was a garden full of the most amazing topiary. And I went and did a live stream from there if anyone hasn't seen it. And if anyone's into this kind of stuff, it was just the most weird place to be, almost like in Harry Potter world. But if people are into this kind of thing, you'll find this really, really fascinating. This is the oldest garden in England.
Oh, wow.
And these are all yew trees.
Oh, wow.
It's just incredible. And this these tunnels that I went through of this
wow.
Go and check it out. All this old twisted what's the twisted hazel, and let's take us now into these little tunnels that brought you out into a pond. It's just, if anyone's interested in topiary, go and check it out because it was a fascinating place. I've been past it so many times. Walking through these tunnels was really surreal. You have to be there to kind of feel it, but it was
beautiful.
A lot of fun. It was really a nice place to be. So, guys, from next week, from tomorrow, over on Bigfoot Odyssey, we're doing Halloween Spook Week.
What a week! you guys have coming up. I was so impressed to see that in my YouTube feed today. I really was. I knew nothing about it, and oh my God, there it is.
So Monday we've got Dave Hodrin, who's a Birmingham UFO guy from England, who's fascinating accounts. Really, he's the man for documenting all this stuff and the go-to for UFO stuff. On Tuesday we've got Dark Waters. On Wednesday we've got Larry Batson. On Thursday we've got Kenny Irish and his friend Gary something Robusto. I think you might know him, Pat. Friday we've got Dr. Jeff Meldrum coming on.
Awesome.
Then Saturday we've got Wes Germer and Tony Merkel. So it should be a good week.
Yeah.
Thank heavens that the clocks have changed in England. I get to start an hour earlier because it's only midnight now. So that's a good job. If I'm going to be doing it every night, I can't be starting at 1 o'clock every morning. So midnight's a bit better. So I'm looking forward to that. Jason, thank you.
Appreciate you, Daniela.
And you. And I will see you next week. Pat, thanks a lot. Welcome anytime onto Anything Goes. As in anybody is. If you ever want to come on and join us, just give us a shout and I'll send you an invite. But until then, good night, everyone.